Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Florencia Soto, and I'm with the UN Department of Public Information. I am joined by Ambassador Elayne Whyte Gómez of Costa Rica, who is also the president of the UN Conference to negotiate a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons, leading towards their total elimination. She will brief you first, and then we'll have some time for questions. Ms. Whyte, Ambassador Whyte, welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you. I welcome all of you, and I thank you for being here. We are on the verge of adopting the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I am very pleased to brief you on the progress achieved by the conference, the United Nations Conference, convened by the General Assembly to negotiate a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons, leading to their total elimination. After 3 weeks since we reconvened on June 15th, 27 formal sessions, many informal consultations and negotiations, the conference has negotiated the text of the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which is up for adoption when it reconvenes tomorrow, Friday, July 7th. The conference will reconvene to formally adopt the treaty. This will be a historic moment, and it will be the first multilateral nuclear disarmament treaty to be concluded in more than 20 years. After our final review of the text yesterday, I am convinced that we have achieved a general agreement on a robust and comprehensive prohibition on nuclear weapons. The final draft reflects the total sum of the efforts of all the states participating in the conference since March, because remember that we started on March the 27th. The outcome of that work in March generated input from all delegations, and it was an opportunity also for discussion on all proposals and ultimately compromised by all delegations. Since this is a negotiation, no one delegation can leave having gained everything they asked for from their national perspective. Yet, I am really confident that the final draft has captured the aspirations of the overwhelming majority of those participating in the conference, including civil society. As you know, whose enthusiasm, knowledge, collective experience has been a key driver of this process. The treaty contains prohibitions included in Article 1 that are intended to cover the full range of nuclear weapon-related activities. These prohibitions form the heart of the treaty. They have been carefully crafted in such a way as to be clear, concise, and at the same time comprehensive. The treaty also includes several pathways for nuclear armed states to join the treaty and to engage with this regime. In first place, states that own or possess nuclear weapons can join the treaty and at the same time, they need to cooperate with the International Atomic Energy Agency in order to verify the correctness and completeness of its nuclear inventory. Those following several experiences that we have already seen in recent history, such as was the case of South Africa. But in addition to that possibility, And nuclear-armed states can join the treaty, and from day one, and then they need to cooperate with a competent international authority in the verification of the elimination of its program, under the supervision of the and with the accompanying of the meeting of state parties. The meeting of state parties is an important institutional arrangement that this treaty has in order to further develop the regime, to further develop its norms, to work on the implementation of the treaty. At the same time, it can adapt to the changing circumstances and future needs that might arise when considering the very specific cases of nuclear disarmament, since we already know that the scale of the nuclear programs worldwide varies significantly. The treaty also includes, for the first time in a multilateral nuclear disarmament instrument, obligations relating to assistance to victims of the testing and use of nuclear weapons, as well as for the environmental remediation of areas contaminated as a result of nuclear weapon activities. The treaty, no doubt, will complement and strengthen the global architecture of nuclear disarmament and the non-proliferation regime. This is a historic event for humanity. And most importantly, the conference is responding to the urgency of the call received by the General Assembly, when the General Assembly encouraged the conference to conclude as soon as possible this legally binding instrument. Let me just remind you that this conference has been convened pursuant to Resolution 71-258, that among other considerations related to the slow pace of multilateral nuclear disarmament negotiations and the increased concern over the catastrophic humanitarian consequences that would result from any use of nuclear weapons, agreed to convene this diplomatic conference, also bearing in mind that the current international environment makes increased political attention to disarmament and non-proliferation issues, the promotion of multilateral disarmament and the achievement of a world without nuclear weapons, all the more urgent for the international community to address. Tomorrow, when we finish with the session, we would also reconvene here to brief you on the results of the last session of the conference convened by the General Assembly to negotiate and conclude as soon as possible this legally binding instrument, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I thank you very much, and I will be available for your questions.
Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Shauna McGee from Kyoto News, and on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association, we'd like to thank you very much for having this very critical, timely briefing, and congratulations. It's been a very long 3 weeks. I have two quick questions for you. Going into the session tomorrow, we had heard that there may be a vote. Can you tell us how likely this is of a scenario? And secondly, some have criticized this process because there's been no P5, no NATO states except for Holland, and Japan is among those countries that haven't been there. And we've heard that there's been a lot of pressure put on some of those countries by nuclear weapon states, such as the United States. Last time there was a press briefing by Ambassador Nikki Haley in front of the GA Hall. We heard there were letters that were sent around, statements From your position, have you seen any kind of pressure that you could describe to us exerted on any participating states or others? Thank you so much.
Tomorrow, we hope that the conference will be able to adopt the treaty by consensus. The possibility of any delegation requesting a vote is a possibility that is included in the rules of procedure of the conference. It is therefore provided it's the first time in disarmament affairs that such a forum can arrive at decisions, can make decisions on the basis of a vote. I cannot anticipate what the result is going to be, but I can tell you that I really hope that the text, the treaty, will be adopted by consensus. Now, as to the group of countries that have decided to not to attend this process, I can only tell you that the process of developing norms is different from that of the universalization of those norms. This is to say, let me just cite the example of the treaty of the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, which at the beginning was not as universal as it is now, and it took almost 30 years to have all the members of the Security Council become state members to that regime. So I think it is important to bear in mind that as long as we have a mandate by the General Assembly to work and to create this norm that will complement the international legal architecture that covers weapons of mass destruction, we should complete that mandate. And once the treaty is adopted, the work that we need to develop is also, first of all, the implementation, but also universalization, which is the case for all the treaties. And as we all know, the international environment is changing very rapidly. We should be ready, and we should have the architecture in place so that when international conditions change, we will have an architecture that will serve as the basis for the future advancement and progress in multilateral disarmament.
Thank you very much. Waldo, Latin American News Agency. Me gustaría preguntarle en español. Se ha hablado mucho de las ausencias a este proceso, pero me gustaría saber, o sea, ¿cuántos países de los 193 Estados miembros sí han formado parte del proceso? Y aunque ha sido un proceso global, le agradecería algún comentario sobre cuál ha sido la participación de América Latina y el Caribe en estas negociaciones. Muchas gracias.
De hecho, le voy a responder con un dato. Can I respond in Spanish? It's okay? Y luego voy a traducir. I will answer in Spanish and then I will translate for the rest of the group. Le voy a responder con un dato, el más reciente, que tenemos 129 países que han sometido sus credenciales y que han estado participando en la conferencia. Decenas de representantes de la sociedad civil, científicos, académicos, activistas. Ha sido un proceso colectivo, inclusivo y sumamente participativo. Como presidenta de la conferencia, me ha sorprendido de una manera muy especial el nivel de compromiso y convicción de todas las delegaciones, que desde el 15 de junio han manifestado su voluntad de que este tratado sea concluido y sea adoptado el día de mañana. I will then answer with factual information. We have 129 states that have submitted credentials for this conference and that have been participating in the talks. We have also seen dozens of representatives of civil society, academics, scholars, scientists, activists taking part in the talks, and they have been. It has been a truly inclusive and collective work. Of course, you might already know that the Latin American Caribbean region was the first region to ever sign a treaty for the total elimination of nuclear weapons in the Treaty of Tlatelolco that established the first nuclear weapon-free zone. So you can imagine that the Latin American countries have had a very important role and have actively been engaged and participated in this process.
Thank you very much, Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. A couple of follow-up questions. When do you expect the parties to meet tomorrow? Will it be in the morning? Will it be in the afternoon? And what will be the immediate follow-up to an expected adoption? And what message do you want to send to the nuclear states and the NATO members who boycotted this meeting?
The conference will reconvene at 10 a.m. tomorrow at conference room 1, which has been the conference where we have been working for the last week since we reconvened on June the 15th. I will send a message to all the members of the United Nations and to the General Assembly, who was the one that created this mandate. I would say the world has been waiting for this legal norm for 70 years. And all the delegations that have taken part in these negotiations have worked tirelessly and with great conviction, understanding that the world needs this legal norm as a global public good. And it is also a response for humanity. We strongly believe in a rules-based international order, and in this case, we are contributing to building this rules-based international order by completing the international legal architecture that addresses the issue of weapons of mass destruction. We now work towards the implementation and future universalization of the treaty.
Thank you. Carla Stay, Global Research, and I would like to congratulate you on your tremendous job. I know how dedicated you were because I attended as many open conferences as you permitted, and I know it was a desperately needed treaty. I have two questions. It wasn't clear. It said at one point that this treaty is not intended to in any way supplant the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now, there's a lot of confusion about the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and one of the meetings we had with Sergio Duarte discussed the way in which that treaty can be abused and has been used to present themselves by the nuclear weapon states as being authorized by the Non-Proliferation Treaty to hold nuclear weapons. And I think some of it has to do with the interpretation of the language. The boycott by the US, the UK, and France is obviously a violation of the NPT, which Article 6 requires them to negotiate in good faith, which they are clearly not doing. That's one question. And the follow-up question is, when you have this treaty, which we expect and hope and congratulate you on tomorrow. How will you get the nuclear weapon states to join? Because this is a matter of the survival of the human species and the planet.
It is true that the Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons has 3 pillars: the non-proliferation, the disarmament, and the peaceful use of nuclear energy. And it is true that the other pillars have been more successful than the pillar of disarmament. I think the General Assembly, when the General Assembly decided to convene this conference, which is, as I said, is a historic milestone, the General Assembly did so convinced of the need to make progress and to take the first step. And the first step is to provide a legal norm that was built on the multilateral framework, institutional framework, and hopefully a legal norm that is global. Because, of course, we have many treaties that create nuclear weapon-free zones, but we needed to have a global norm. That is the first step. And I think the first message that is contained in the treaty is that the conference overwhelmingly expressed the political will that this treaty will be non-discriminatory in nature, and this is the reason why specific provisions have been included to allow nuclear weapon states to become state parties to the treaty and start their elimination process within the regime. After the conference and when the treaty starts in its implementation process, there should be ample opportunities to engage with the rest of the community, with the international community, to explore when the moment is ripe to start seeing the first countries that can be interested in becoming non-nuclear. But the first thing I would say is the General Assembly decided to create the norm as the first step. Once the legal architecture is set, then new negotiations, new talks, and other measures need to be taken into consideration and pursued in order to see this objective become a reality, to see the first nuclear weapon state to become a state party to the treaty. I think all humanity expects that moment, expects to see that moment. We all hope to see that moment sooner than later. I don't have a specific date, though.
All right, all the way in the back.
Thank you. Mauricio Guerrero, Mexican News Agency. Thank you so much, Ambassador. How many countries have expressed to you their will to sign the treaty in September? And when do you expect the treaty to enter into force? I understand that will happen until 50 countries ratified it. When do you expect that to happen? Thank you.
We certainly hope that the countries that have so actively participated in the drafting of this treaty will all be interested in also in signing it as of September the 20th. And if we judge by the progress that was achieved in a historic manner, because no treaty has ever been negotiated and concluded in such a rapid pace. If we take that precedent, we will really expect that we will have, as soon as possible, the 50th instrument of ratification for the treaty. But how can I give you a date? I really hope that it's going to be as soon as the commitment of the negotiations have expressed to the world.
Matthew Lee, Inner City Press, on behalf of the Free UN Coalition for Access. Thanks a lot for doing these briefings and in advance for the one tomorrow. I wanted to, this dispute around withdrawal and what the length of time of notice should be, I obviously don't, can you say, like, I mean, I've heard some people say it should be longer. It should be longer so that it's harder to quickly develop, and some people saying there should be shorter because of the issues that would be raised. How would you describe sort of the process to arrive at where you are? And also, inevitably, some people are pointing at the most recent missile launch by the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. How do you think that impacted the negotiation of the treaty, and what would this treaty do? Not that the Security Council is solving it, but can you say anything that this treaty you think would do to address this pressing situation? Thanks a lot.
It certainly was one of the most issues, the most discussed issues in the negotiations, the issue of the possibility to withdraw from the treaty. And the will of the conference was to raise the threshold that already exists in international law, especially in the Vienna Convention of the Law of the Treaties, so that it will be not as easy to withdraw, and at the same time to have some additional standards. For instance, if you are a party to a conflict, that should be an impediment. It is very difficult when you have issues that are so that can be so controversial. It is already a success to be able to find common ground, and common ground usually means that nobody is actually satisfied with it, but they find a compromise solution that would be the second best for many delegations. And this is precisely what happened with this norm for the withdrawal, the potentiality to withdraw from the treaty. Of course, there were many other expressions, including from civil society, considering that this treaty should not have any possibility to withdraw. Nevertheless, international law, and specifically the law of the treaty, does allow for such action from any state. We therefore, the majority of the conference decided and opted for an option to increase the threshold. To what extent the existence of a norm influences the behavior of states? In this, you can always say the glass is half empty, half full. I would say that having a norm in place does play a role and does influence the behavior of states, of individuals, of societies. It also becomes a pressure, a standard of behavior. Having said that, having a norm to prohibit nuclear weapons, we strongly believe will play a fundamental role in shaping international politics in the future, and will also play a role in the development of new security paradigms for the 21st century. In that case, we also hope that we'll contribute to prevent that we have other experiences like the one that you are mentioning, or any future country that would like to develop a nuclear weapons program. What I think the case of the current crisis we are seeing places at the center stage of the international community the need to act and to move and to make progress towards nuclear development. Since we are reminded constantly that nuclear weapons do exist, their power is way beyond our human imagination, and the decision to use them is in the hands of human beings. And I think the current crisis has reminded the international community of that reality, precisely because in the last times, ever since September 9/11, we were concerned with dealing, as the international community and the national level, all of us were very concerned in dealing with the issue of terrorism. And the international crisis has reminded us that the threat and the risk of nuclear weapons has not gone away. We, of course, still have to make a progress in terms of fighting terrorism, but the risk is there, and we cannot look the other way. We need to address this risk, and the international community has to develop means to deal with this threat. Developing a norm is one of them.
Thank you, Ambassador, for this briefing. My name is Abadi. I'm from the paper Le Dossier. This treaty is the result of multilateral diplomatic negotiations taking place at UN headquarters. But how is the UN connected with it? Does it have the support of the Secretary General? What specific role did the Office of Disarmament and Legal Affairs play in the elaboration of the treaty? Thank you.
As to the role of the institutional framework, I would say that the Office of Disarmament Affairs has served as the General Secretariat of the conference. We also have received the support, the moral support, and also the guidance of the new High Representative of Disarmament Affairs. And actually, the treaty has designated the Secretary General as the depositary of this instrument, which I hope this is a role that he will play, as is the case for many other international instruments. This means that the Office of the Secretary General will have to play a role not only in the signature, the upcoming signature ceremony, but also in terms of the future support that the treaty and the regime will need to start its implementation and universalization process. So we will have to say that we very much count on the support of the Secretary General, as this was a mandate by the General Assembly. So we hope to see the General Secretary, the Office of the Secretary General, perform his duties, and we can count on that as well.
You hope to have the support of the Secretary General. Does he actually support the treaty?
I suppose that he does support the treaty, as this is a mandate from the General Assembly.
Rhonda Haubin from tots.de. I'm a blog columnist there. And the question I have is about whether there was discussion or there's anything in the treaty to look at the situation where, which the negative security assurances was supposed to deal with. Because, for example, in the situation with the DPRK and the Korean Peninsula, we have the US giving a nuclear umbrella to Japan and the ROK. And so that has put a situation where the DPRK was at a disadvantage. And it didn't seem that, I didn't see that brought up when people were considering the problem of the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Was that brought up at all, or is there any consideration of such a situation? Thank you.
There was an important discussion in the conference about the role of the the threat of the use of nuclear weapons and its role in the security doctrines. In that case, the conference decided to include in the Article 1 on prohibitions, precisely a prohibition that is included in 1.d. This is a prohibition on the use or threaten to use nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices. And many delegates were precisely mentioning the impact that this norm will have on precisely on the security doctrines and in the shaping of the new, let's say, security doctrines for the future.
Sorry, my name is Tsuchiya from Kyoto News, Japan. You said that you are confident that the treaty will be adopted tomorrow, and it will be a historical moment. But our government, Japanese government, which has special status as a country which was attacked by nuclear weapons in the past, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but they will not be there tomorrow. Would you give me some comments about that? And then you need 2/3 of vote to adopt it. Is it correct? That's it.
Yes, I will not make reference to specific cases, as each government has explained, and the Japanese delegation also took the floor during the inaugural session, and they explained the reasons for which they made the decision. So I will not comment on that. Yes, the rules of procedure have included the possibility of making decisions by 2/3 majority when faced with substantive issues. That is included as the rules of procedure adopted by the conference.
One last follow-up.
I'm wondering, and I very much hope that this treaty is adopted tomorrow, how will you deal with the Security Council, whose permanent members all have nuclear weapons? And the ambassador of Uruguay made a superb comment yesterday as they were talking about sanctioning the DPRK for nuclear weapons. And he said, at this moment, there is a conference to prohibit nuclear weapons, and yet not only North Korea, but every single nuclear weapon state has boycotted or not attended or participated in the conference. So if your treaty is adopted and the kind of double standards exist in the Security Council for which it's notorious, will you be able to deal with that in any ongoing way? Because it would seem to me that the enormous value of this treaty is to be able to apply a single standard as opposed to the double standards.
I think the importance of this treaty to become a general norm in international law is to be able to sign it and to have it become a legal reality when it enters into force. I think that is the first thing that we have to focus on, to see that the treaty enter into force and to start the implementation phase of the treaty. From there, then the Conference of State Parties will be dealing with the issue of how to address the different categories of states in the international community and how to interact and to engage with the nuclear states, the nuclear possessors. So the first thing is to adopt it, sign it, and have it become and have it enter into force. I think that is the first, and once that happens, the Conference of State Parties is going to be the institutional mechanisms to deal with the questions that you have raised and all the challenges and tasks of developing the norm into a regime, functioning regime. Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope to see you tomorrow after the conference. Thank you. Good afternoon.